Scorned at the Alpha King's tournament for bringing a shabby, runt-like pet, Lyra endures the pack's laughter and the king's cold disdain. But when blood is spilled and treachery ignites the arena, her timid companion explodes into its true form, an ancient frost wolf bound to her soul, forcing the arrogant Alpha King to realize the weakest girl he mocked is the only one who can save his throne. People still talk about the winter when everything went wrong at the Alpha King's tournament. They say it began with a girl who brought the wrong kind of beast into the arena and a king who was tired of pretending he didn't have a heart. Snow was still clinging stubbornly to the stone steps when Aria reached the gates of Frosthal Arena, her boots soaked and her fingers numb. Around her, warriors in gleaming armor laughed and shoved each other, their cloaks lined with rich furs, their banners snapping in the icy wind. Each alpha had come with something terrifying on a chain: massive shadow wolves, horned bears, scaled felines with fire in their throats. The air shook with growls and roars, with the sharp metallic scent of steel and the thick musk of battle-ready beasts. At Aria's heel moved something so small that most people didn't see it at first. It padded through the snow with hesitant paws, its fur matted and patchy, its tail dragging like it carried the weight of the whole winter. It looked more like a half-starved alley stray than a tournament creature. Every few steps, it pressed its cold nose against Aria's ankle, as if asking, "Are you sure we belong here?" "I know," she whispered under her breath, hoping her voice would stop trembling. "We don't fit, but we came anyway." High above the gates, carved into black ice and ancient stone, stared the sigil of the realm, a howling wolf crowned with a ring of frozen flame. Behind that symbol, somewhere in the towering palace, the Alpha King himself was watching the arrivals. Aria could feel him like a distant storm, a pressure in the air that made everyone stand straighter and speak softer. They called him King Kale of the North, the Frost Alpha. Stories said his heart was colder than the mountains that shaped his kingdom. But the stories never mentioned the nights he stood alone on the balcony, watching the lights over the snowfields and wishing that power did not always have to mean fear. Inside the arena, the cold changed. It wasn't just winter anymore, it was the kind of chill that grew out of stone and memory. Tall stands rose in every direction, packed with villagers, nobles, and warriors who had traveled for days to watch the spectacle. Flags and torches rippled in the wind, drums thudded like heavy footsteps. Somewhere a horn sounded, long and low, announcing the beginning of the Alpha King's tournament. Aria clutched the leather strap she'd tied loosely around her creature's neck. Her hands were rough from village work, not sword training. She had no armor, only a patched wool coat and a cloak too thin for this weather. When people looked at her, they saw exactly what she was: the wrong person in the wrong place. The first sneer came from her left. "That's your pet?" A young alpha from the western clans tilted his head and laughed. His own beast, a hulking black wolf baring its teeth in what looked like a cruel grin. Did the kennels run out of real animals? Another warrior joined in. "Maybe she's here to clean the arena after the fights. That thing looks like it belongs under a table, begging for scraps." Laughter rippled through the waiting competitors, icy and sharp. A few of them pointed openly now. Aria's face burned hot despite the cold, but she pressed her lips together and kept moving. At her heel, the little creature flinched at the noise, its ears flattening. "It's all right, Frost," she murmured, kneeling for a moment to scratch gently behind its ear. The fur there was soft, almost silky, unlike the tangled mess that covered the rest of its body. "They don't know you, that's all." Frost blinked up at her with faded blue eyes, too dull, people said, for a real predator. But when Aria looked into them, she saw the night her village's last fire almost went out, and this half-frozen beast had appeared at the edge of the woods, silent and shaking, and laid its head in her lap as if it had chosen her and no one else. She remembered how everyone had told her to leave it, that weak things did not survive northern winters. She had taken it home anyway. Far above the arena floor, on a throne carved from ice that never melted, King Kale watched the arrivals with careful, unreadable eyes. To most of the spectators, he was only a figure in silver and steel armor, a crown of frost resting against dark hair, a jaw set in stone. But the closest advisors, the ones who had seen him before dawn, knew there was tension in his shoulders today, a tiredness he could not quite hide. He had seen too many tournaments. He knew how easily a crowd could turn its hunger for glory into hunger for blood. From his vantage point, he saw the warriors first, the proud, the cruel, the hopeful. Then he saw the girl. She moved like someone who had taught her body not to shake, even when it wanted to. She did not wear any alpha's crest. The beast at her feet was so small, so unimpressive, that Kale almost missed it. But then he noticed the way she placed one hand instinctively between it and the world, a quiet, protective gesture that didn't match the bravado of the others. "Who is she?" he asked softly, not taking his eyes off her. The steward beside him shuffled a stack of names. Aria of Hollow Glen, Your Majesty, a village girl, entered under the open challenge rule, no clan. Kale's eyebrows lifted a fraction. A villager in the Alpha's ring, we have not seen that in years. The council recommended closing that rule, sire, the steward reminded him carefully. You chose to keep it. Kale knew. He remembered the argument, the voices telling him that power should remain with the strong, the noble, the properly trained. He had kept the rule for reasons he had not explained to them, reasons that felt like his last quiet rebellion against the idea that worth could be measured in titles and teeth alone. "And her beast?" he asked. The steward hesitated. The form says only, companion of unknown breed. Kale leaned slightly forward. From this height he could not see the creature clearly, only that it was small and clung to the girl's side as though she were its entire world. The mockery from the other competitors reached him even here. Something about it twisted faintly in his chest. He had been raised to believe that only the strongest should stand in the arena, yet he had also seen what happened to those who were told they were nothing. "Announce the first round," he said quietly. "Let the rules stand. We will see what courage is made of this year." Down on the arena floor, Aria lined up with the others, trying not to stare at the great beasts to her left and right. Frost stayed pressed so close to her boot that she could feel each quiver of its small body through the leather. She told herself she wasn't here for their approval. She wasn't here to win glory or to become a legend. She was here because her village's fields had frozen early, because half the children were coughing through the nights, and because the Alpha King had promised one boon to the champion of the tournament, any wish within his power to grant. A new well, grain from the royal stores, healers for the sick, shelter before the next winter storm. She had no clan behind her, no army, no roaring monster. All she had was the creature that everyone else thought was a joke, and the stubborn, burning belief that sometimes kindness and loyalty could carry more strength than claws and fangs. A sudden hush rippled through the arena as the royal herald stepped onto the central platform. His voice rang out, amplified by the stone and ice. "By decree of His Majesty Kale, Alpha King of the Northern Realms, the tournament of beasts and bonds shall now begin. Warriors, step forward with your chosen companions." The ground trembled slightly as massive beasts padded or thundered into the ring. Armor clinked, chains rattled, breath steamed like smoke. The crowd roared, a living wave of sound that climbed up to the frozen peaks. Aria swallowed hard and took a step forward. Frost hesitated, then followed, its tiny paws sinking into the churned-up snow of the arena floor. Every eye turned toward the center. The closer she walked, the louder the whispers became. "Is this a joke? She'll last less than a breath. Look at that thing, I've seen healthier rabbits." Aria lifted her chin, not in arrogance, but in the fragile, trembling way of someone who has nothing left to lose. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel shame and fear pressing in from all sides, but she kept her voice gentle when she bent down again and touched Frost's shoulder. "Listen to me," she said quietly, as if the entire world had faded and only the two of them remained. "They don't get to decide who you are. They don't know what you've survived. Just stay with me. That's all we have to do. Stay together." High above, Kale watched her lips move, though he could not hear the words. He saw the way she spoke to the small creature, not as if it were a tool or a weapon, but as if it were a friend. His advisors shifted uneasily around him, already predicting her quick defeat, already preparing their clever remarks about mercy and tradition. "Do you wish me to remove her from the roster, sire?" the steward asked under his breath. "For her safety, she will be torn apart in there." Kale did not answer at once. His fingers curled around the armrest of his throne, the cold biting into his skin. He had been crowned in blood, had been taught that compassion was a weakness kings could not afford. Yet as he watched the girl, he remembered the first time he had stood in that same arena as a boy, too young and too frightened, pretending that the weight on his shoulders did not hurt. If she steps into the ring, he said slowly, it will be because she chose to, not because we pushed her, and not because we pulled her away. The herald began to call names one by one, assigning places and matches. The crowd cheered for their favorites, booed their rivals, filled the cold air with a frenzy of expectation. Each time another name echoed across the arena, Aria's stomach tightened. Her fingers dug into the strap around Frost's neck. Then she heard it. Aria of Hollow Glens, the herald proclaimed, voice carrying to every corner, accompanied by companion of unknown breed. The arena went strangely quiet for a heartbeat, as if everyone were holding in a laugh at the same time. Then the sound burst out, savage and delighted. "That's your pet," someone shouted from the stands. "Did you steal it from a child?" More voices piled on, a storm of mockery crashing down over her. Aria's legs felt suddenly heavy. Part of her wanted to turn and run, to disappear into the nearest shadow and never show her face again. Frost pressed against her ankle and made a tiny, uncertain sound, something between a whine and a question. Aria closed her eyes just for 1 second. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she could see her village, the cracked wells, the frostbitten fields, the tired, worried faces of people who had already given up on miracles. She could hear her little brother's voice, thin and hopeful, asking, "Will you really stand before the Alpha King for us?" When she opened her eyes, they were wet but steady. "We walk forward," she whispered to Frost, "even if they laugh, especially then." She took a breath that hurt her lungs and started toward the center of the arena. Every step felt like a battle. Each jeer and shout lashed at her like a whip, but with every insult something strange happened. Frost's ears twitched. The dull blue of its eyes sharpened just a fraction. A faint shimmer of cold traced the line of its back, so slight that no one but Aria noticed. Up on his throne, Kale leaned forward without meaning to. Something in the air had shifted. For a heartbeat, the cold around him felt different, like the moment before a storm changes direction. Aria reached her mark in the center circle and turned to face the royal dais, her knees threatening to give way. Frost stood at her side, head low, fur ruffled by the wind. The arena roared with laughter and scorn, but she held the king's gaze as best she could from so far below, refusing to bow her head in humiliation. For a long, tense moment, the Alpha King and the village girl simply looked at each other across the frozen distance, one cloaked in armor and legend, the other wrapped in worn wool and stubbornness, with a worthless creature at her heel. Kale's eyes narrowed, not in cruelty, but in something like recognition. Down by Aria's boot, Frost suddenly stopped trembling. The little creature's breath hit the icy air in a thin stream of mist. Then, just for an instant, that mist thickened, swirling around its muzzle like a tiny, coiling cloud. The snow at its paws cracked with a sound too soft for the crowd to hear. Aria felt the temperature around her drop, a sharp, biting cold that had nothing to do with the winter wind. The hair on her arms rose under her sleeves. Her heart skipped. "Frost," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "What are you?" The creature lifted its head. In the space of a heartbeat, its faded blue eyes flashed with a light Aria had never seen before, ancient, glacial, and impossibly deep. She froze, her breath catching in her throat as the world around her narrowed to those eyes and the impossible power flickering behind them, just beginning to wake. The first crack in the ice. For a heartbeat, the whole arena seemed to forget how to breathe. The laughter, the rustle of banners, the clink of armor, all of it slipped into strange, held silence as Frost lifted its head, and those faded blue eyes flared with impossible light. Aria felt the world around her blur, as if every sound and color had been pulled far away, leaving only the creature at her side and the cold, ancient gaze that suddenly didn't look small or weak at all. A ring of frost whispered out from Frost's paws, a thin white circle blooming over the dark snow. It stopped exactly at the tip of Aria's boots, as if the cold itself respected her. The breath in her chest turned sharp and icy, but not painful. For a moment she had the dizzy sense that something old was looking through those eyes, weighing her, asking a question without words. Then Frost blinked and it was gone. The light faded. The creature shivered and hunched low again, as if embarrassed by what it had just shown. Up on the throne, Kale sat absolutely still. To the crowd he looked like a carved statue of a king, unmoved and expressionless. Inside, his thoughts were racing. He had seen that sudden spreading frost, the precise circle, the way it stopped before touching the girl. It was too controlled to be an accident. A memory stirred, half-forgotten stories his mother had whispered before the council taught him to stop believing in legends. Spirits of winter that chose a single heart to anchor them. Guardians that only woke when the world was about to change. The herald's voice cut through the air, breaking the spell. First trial, he announced, will be the path of spirits. Each alpha and companion must cross the shifting ring and reach the silver bell at its center. No killing, no maiming. This is a test of bond and control, not slaughter. Sections of the arena floor shuddered and split, reshaping themselves into uneven ridges of ice and snow. Shimmering shapes rose from hidden runes, pale wolves made of light, birds of mist, ghostly bears that flickered in and out of focus. They were not real, but they were convincing enough to make even seasoned warriors hesitate. The air filled with a low, echoing howl, like a choir of memories. The other competitors straightened eagerly. This was the kind of challenge they understood: push forward, crush fear with force, prove dominance. Huge beasts pawed the ground, snorting steam, eager to charge through anything in their path. Beside them, Frost looked even smaller, a scrap of fur that didn't belong in the same world. Aria swallowed. "We don't have to be the strongest," she murmured, more to herself than to Frost. "We just have to not give up." At the sound of the horn, the trial began. A thunder of paws and boots roared across the shifting floor. Illusion wolves snapped at gauntlets and cloaks, ghost bears lunged, phantoms trying to knock the competitors off balance. One alpha sent his horned beast crashing straight through a pack of mist creatures, scattering light like shattered glass. The crowd cheered. Aria took one cautious step, then another. The ice under her feet was slick, treacherous. A pale wolf formed at her side, its eyes empty, its teeth gleaming. Instinct screamed at her to run, but something in Frost's sudden stillness made her pause. The little creature stood rigid, ears pricked, staring straight at the illusion. "Frost," she whispered, "what do you see?" A thin line of cold spread from Frost's paws again, almost invisible this time. It crept across the ice toward the ghost wolf. When it touched the creature's paw, the illusion shivered and then froze, solidifying into clear, harmless ice that cracked and fell apart with a quiet chime. Aria stared slowly, a grin tugged at the corner of her mouth. "All right then, we walk where you say." They moved together, not fast but steady. Where the ghostly creatures lunged, Frost answered with quiet, controlled cold. An illusion bear reared in front of them and turned to clear crystal under Frost's gaze, becoming nothing more than a glittering statue Aria could skirt around. A phantom bird dived at her face. Frost snapped once, and it burst into a flurry of snowflakes that melted before they hit the ground. In the stands, the laughter started to fade, replaced by confused murmurs. People leaned forward, squinting. Some thought it was luck or a trick of the arena. Others noticed the pattern, the way the illusions faltered when they came too close to the runt, the precise paths of hard, safe ice appearing only under Aria's boots. Kale watched without blinking. His advisors began to whisper urgently around him. "She's cheating. It's a curse, Your Majesty. Foreign magic dangerous, untrained. We should stop this now before." "Before what?" Kale cut in quietly, his voice smooth but edged. "Before a village girl walks better with her beast than half our alphas. The rules say the bond may be used in any way that does not harm another challenger. Do you propose I punish her for doing what they could not?" The advisors fell silent, unused to hearing the king defend anyone, much less a stranger with no name or rank. Kale kept his eyes on the small figure in the arena. He couldn't see her face clearly, but he recognized the set of her shoulders, the fierce, stubborn focus. He had worn that same look once, in a younger life he rarely allowed himself to remember. Step by step, Aria and Frost moved through the chaos. A larger alpha, the same one who had mocked her at the gates, tried to cut her off, sending his great black wolf barreling toward them. The beast's massive body pushed a wave of snow and illusion wolves in their direction. For a heartbeat, Aria panicked. "Frost!" The little creature didn't flinch. It planted its paws, and a sudden burst of cold rushed out in a tight, controlled arc, not touching the other alpha or his beast, but hardening the snow right in front of Aria into a low ridge of ice. The wave of slush hit the ridge and broke harmlessly, splitting around her like water around a stone. The crowd gasped. Aria stumbled, then laughed once, breathless and amazed. "You clever thing," she murmured, and for the first time since she had stepped into the arena, she forgot to be ashamed. She was too busy being proud. They reached the center moments later. The silver bell hung from a carved ice arch, untouched. Aria wrapped her cold fingers around the rope and pulled. The clear, ringing note cut through the arena just as a flare of blue-green light shimmered faintly over Frost's fur, there and gone in less than a second. The stands erupted, some in cheers, many in shocked protest. A village girl with a half-starved stray had finished the trial ahead of warriors who had trained their whole lives. Aria stood there, panting, hands still on the rope, hardly able to believe it herself. Frost pressed against her leg, sides heaving, eyes tired but bright. On his throne, Kale exhaled slowly, almost a sigh. Against all sense, the sight eased something tight in his chest. Courage, he thought, watching the girl lower her head to whisper something to her creature. Not the loud kind, not the kind my council parades, the quiet kind that walks into a storm anyway. When Aria left the ring, her legs felt weak but light. The cold wind in the tunnel to the waiting chambers smelled of stone and iron instead of fear now. She reached down and brushed the top of Frost's head with her fingertips. "You were amazing," she told it softly. "Whatever you are, thank you." Frost blinked up at her, and for a moment it looked almost shy, like it didn't quite know what to do with praise. It bumped its nose against her wrist, a clumsy, gentle touch that warmed her more than any cloak. She didn't see the shadow step out from an alcove until it was almost too late. "Well, well," drawled a familiar voice. The Western alpha who had laughed the loudest earlier leaned against the wall, arms folded, his black wolf at his heel. Up close, he was even taller, his eyes hard and amused. The little village girl made it through her baby trial. How charming. Aria tensed. Frost edged closer to her boot. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said quietly. "Please let us pass." "Oh, it's too late for that," he answered, pushing off the wall. "You made us all look like fools out there. Do you think the nobles will laugh that off? They'll want a reason to say it doesn't count. You cheated. You used some kind of trick." "I followed the rules," Aria replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Anyone could have done what we did." "But we didn't," he snapped, his jaw tightened. "So now I need a story that keeps my honor clean." He took a step closer. His wolf mirrored him, muscles bunched, not quite attacking, but crowding Frost back against Aria's ankle. The little creature whimpered, then bared its teeth in a tiny, shaky defiance. The alpha smiled without warmth. "If that thing gets hurt before the next round, the council will call you unfit. They'll dismiss you. No scandal, no questions, just a weak village girl who should never have been here." Something inside Aria, something that had bent and bent for years under other people's power, suddenly refused to bend anymore. She moved instinctively, placing herself fully between the black wolf and Frost. Her hands shook, but she held her ground. "You will not touch him," she said, voice low but vibrating. "Not for your pride, not for any reason." The alpha's eyes flashed with irritation that anyone so small would dare stand against him. "Move," he ordered. In the space of that single word, Frost changed. The air grew sharper, the temperature dropping so fast that both alphas' breath clouded in front of their faces. Frost stepped out from behind Aria's heel, not big, still not impressive, but suddenly very, very still. Its eyes lifted to meet the black wolf's, and this time when the blue light flared, it did not bother to hide. Tiny crystals formed along the tunnel floor, racing outward from Frost's paws like a living lace of ice. The black wolf yelped and jerked back as its claws skidded. Frost's lip curled, not in rage, but in a calm, warning promise. "What is that thing?" the alpha whispered, fear finally slipping into his voice. Before anyone could answer, another presence filled the corridor, heavier than any beast. "Enough." The word was soft, but it carried like thunder. The air seemed to lean away from it. The Western alpha spun around and bowed so fast he almost slipped on the new ice. Kale stood at the far end of the tunnel, cloak draped over his armor, crown catching the cold torchlight. Up close, his face looked less like a statue and more like a tired man who had learned to wear stone where his heart should show. His gaze moved from the spreading Frost to Aria's pale face, then to the trembling creature at her feet. "There will be no accidents in my halls," he said, voice cool. "Not while the trials are still in play." The Western Alpha stammered something about concern and fairness, but Kale barely listened. His eyes were on Aria now, studying the way she still held herself between danger and her pet, even though the danger had shifted and now wore a crown. "Go," the king said curtly to the other Alpha, "tend your beast, and remember, anyone who fears being outshone should train harder, not play dirtier." Flushed with anger and humiliation, the warrior muttered a stiff apology and retreated with his wolf, boots crunching over fragile ice. Silence settled in the tunnel. Aria suddenly became very aware that she was alone with the Alpha King, that her hair was probably a mess from the wind, that her coat looked like it had seen better decades, and that her heart was hammering loud enough to echo. Kale stepped closer, though not so close as to loom. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that was not the cold distance she had expected. It almost looked like concern. "Who taught you," he asked quietly, "to walk into a king's tournament with nothing but that creature and your stubbornness?" Aria's mouth was dry. "No one taught me, Your Majesty," she managed. "I just didn't want to leave him behind, and my village, we have no one else to stand for us, so I came." A flicker crossed Kale's face, quick, almost hidden, at the word village. He knew what his distant decisions looked like when they reached the outer towns: cold numbers, rations, closed gates. He had told himself it was necessary. Hearing the simple honesty in her voice made that certainty shift dangerously. He looked down at Frost, then back at Aria. "You realize," he said slowly, "that whatever you brought with you, it is not ordinary." "I know he's not ordinary," Aria replied, surprising herself with the strength in her words. She couldn't explain what she'd seen, what she felt when Frost's eyes went deep and old, but she knew one thing with painful clarity. "He's kind. He could have hurt that wolf, and he didn't. He just wanted us to be left alone." Kale's lips pressed together as if he were holding back something he wanted to say. Before he could decide whether to say it anyway, the entire tunnel gave a low, shuddering groan. Dust fell from the ceiling. The torches flickered wildly, flames bending toward Frost as if something had suddenly drawn all the heat out of the stone. A deep, distant sound rolled through the arena like ice cracking across a frozen lake, slow and heavy and ancient. Aria reached for the wall to steady herself. Frost's fur stood on end, eyes wide, not in fear this time, but in strange, sharp awareness, as if it were hearing a voice far below the earth. Kale felt it too. The cold that answered Frost's presence was not only in the tunnel now, it pulsed from the foundations of his entire kingdom. Very quietly, with the sound of stone whispering around them and the echo of that deep crack still hanging in the air, the Alpha King and the village girl looked at each other. For the first time, both of them understood the same terrifying truth. Whatever had woken inside that small, trembling creature was big enough to shake the heart of the mountain itself. And neither of them knew if the kingdom was ready for it.